Hello students, today we are looking at the poem The Cold Within by James Patrick Kinney. We open up to a bleak dramatic scene in this stanza. The poet recounts a tale he has heard of six persons caught together in the grip of a severe winter. Each of them probably has a single stick of wood. Note the poet's use of the word humans. He wants to draw attention to the gathering as specific individual rather than as a collective group. They were trapped by happenstance, which means they were trapped by chance, implying no escape from a situation created by chance. The adjectives bleak and bitter describing the cold add to the ominous feeling. The second stanza cuts into a key character in the story, the dying fire. The group's prospects of survival do not really look good. In the heart of winter, keeping warm is critical to survival. The fire offers a chance for salvation if each person would use their respective logs to feed it. The dying fire is a silent appeal to the group to help themselves by helping each other. The next verses reveal how the situation unfolds. We find that the first person withheld his log from the fire only because it would also benefit a black person. This is racism, where there is discrimination because of a person's race. The man will not even warm himself if someone he looks down upon simply because of his skin color will gain. We move on to the next stanza. The second person looked across the fire and saw someone who he knew who didn't share his religious ideology, and just because of that, he can't bear to give up his log to the common fire. This is bigotry, which speaks of intolerance towards a person because they do not share the same opinions or ideas. The focus now shifts. Here is a person who seems poor. His tattered clothes in the cold weather hint at poverty. He perhaps felt the cold more than the others, as we notice that he gave his coat a hitch, adjusting it closer to his body to get some warmth from the inadequate clothing. But here too is a dead end. We see that he is a victim of classism or discrimination based on social or economic class, considering those favorably placed than him to be idle. He is defensive and, in his eyes, the rich do not deserve his meager ration and he will not part with his. At cross purposes, we find the next exhibit of apathy, the rich man. Caught up holding his riches in his head, he is oblivious to reality. Greed blinds him as he selfishly, in an illegal, underhand manner, makes schemes to keep his wealth to himself and not share it with anyone. He even miserly holds on to his stick, keeping it from the poor, whom he perceives as aimless and lazy. The victim becomes an abuser here. We know the black person had experienced racism. Revenge for the atrocities he had faced from the white people was the only thing on his mind. One wonders if he had already resigned himself to dying. He saw the first fire pass from his sight. He realized that the fire was fast getting spent, but the spark of human kindness had died in him. And literally too, he chose to let the group's fire die. He would perish, but he would take the others he hated down with him as well. For the first time in the poem The Cold Within, the poet foreshadows the fate of the group by finally describing the bunch as forlorn or hopeless. Until then, the poet had reserved judgment, allowing the reader instead to examine each individual in turn and derive his own conclusion. Unfortunately, we find that the last person also perpetuates the vicious cycle of inertia. There is a word for this person's attitude and it is not in the English language. Please pay attention here. It is called Mahamila Pina Patai. Mahamila Pina Patai. This is a word in the indigenous South American language of the Yagan people. It refers to a look shared between people where each hopes that the other will do something that all of them want, but none are willing to initiate. In giving just to get, the last person played a losing move in the game, a metaphor for the game of life. We witness the grim aftermath of the group's rigidity of spirit. Death comes, and it is personified here with stilled hands. Each individual became their own agent of death, their hands frozen stiff with their refusal to act. The fact that each of them still possessed their firewood when they died suggests the twisted motives in retaining their firewood, proof enough of sin. The final lines abound with irony. We realize it was not the cold weather outside that really killed the group after all. It was the cold in their hearts, the lack of warm human spirits, the cold within. Let's take a look at the figures of speech used in this poem. We can identify three figures of speech in the poem. Number one, alliteration. Number two, metaphor. And number three, personification. The examples as you can see here are for alliteration in bleak and bitter cold, where B in bleak and B in bitter. They are repetition of the same consonant sound. And for metaphor, the example is giving only to those who gave was how he played the game. In these lines, the human life is compared to a game. The last man would give something to one only who could give him something in return. This is how we played the game of life. The third figure of speech used in the poem is personification, and the example is their logs held tight in death's still hands. The poet has personified death into a human with a still hand.